Sacagawea was born in 1788 and died in 1812. She was captured by the Hidatsa Indians, an enemy of her own tribe. She was pregnant when she was chosen by the Hidatsa tribe, and she needed to interpret her tribe's language. She joined Lewis and Clark expedition on their famous expedition across the western frontier. She helped by being a symbol of peace, as it was less suspicious for a group to have a woman and a child. In her tribe's language, her name means bird woman. Her death is controversial. Some believe her death was in 1812, and many Native Americans believe it was in 1884. Her husband, Toussaint Charbonneau, was 41 when they married. She was in her early teens. Sacagawea walked for 5,000 or more miles with her son on the expedition of the western frontier. In 2000, the U.S. Mint printed the first golden Sacagawea dollar coin. Harriet Tubman was born into slavery in 1820. After escaping slavery, she went back to Maryland in the 1850s to help the Underground Railroad. To not get caught while running the Underground Railroad, she would disguise herself. Tubman was a nurse in the Civil War and also was a spy. She ended up so poor that she began to smuggle gold. Tubman supported women's suffrage after the Civil War. She also received brain surgery to fix the damage she received as a child. Tubman died in her own home for the aged. Tubman's birth name was Araminta Ross. Tubman would run the Underground Railroads in the winter months to try and avoid being seen. "200 copies of the Declaration of Independence were distributed throughout the colonies. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams both died on the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. The population of the United States was around 2.5 million around the signing of the document. 9 of the signers died before the end of the American Revolution. July 2nd is the actual day that the U.S. declared independence on Great Britain. Most of the members that signed the document didn't actually sign until early August of 1776. A riot started in New York once the document arrived. The youngest person to sign the Declaration of Independence was 26 years old. The Declaration states reasons why the 13 colonies wanted to split from Britain. Not all the signers of the Declaration signed the document on the same day. Lincoln ran, but fell short in the vice presidential election of 1856. Abraham Lincoln made Thanksgiving a national holiday. Lincoln only served one term. John Wilkes Booth assassinated Lincoln in 1865. Lincoln created the Secret Service. Abraham Lincoln argued a case in front of the United States Supreme Court and lost. He lost 5 separate elections before being elected by patient proclamation. Lincoln brought back the southern states after they seceded, and Abraham Lincoln was born in Hodgeville, Kentucky. The S in Ulysses S. Grant didn't stand for anything. Grant won the first major Union victory of the Civil War. He struggled with alcohol throughout his life. Ulysses S. Grant was supposed to be at Ford Theater when President Lincoln was killed. He had no political experience before becoming president. Grant was responsible for dismantling the KKK during Reconstruction. Ulysses wasn't his real first name. Instead, it was Hiram. Grant was the youngest president elected at the time. Grant tried to annex the Dominican Republic to the U.S. Ulysses S. Grant died on July 23, 1885, at the age of 63.
Florence Kelley was born on September 12, 1859, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Florence Kelley was pushed into social activism as a child. Her parents, both Abolionists, support Kelley's early interest in education and women's rights. At the age of 16, she entered Cornell University. After graduating, she moved to Europe to study at the University of Zurich. While in Europe, Kelley joined the German Social Democratic Party and translated many of the party's important works. She returned to the United States in 1891 and joined the Reform movement in Chicago. While working with Hull Houses, founded by Jane Addams, Kelly was hired to investigate the labor industry in the city. Her findings led to changing of the working conditions for laborers. She was selected to be chief factory inspector of the state of Illinois. She was the first woman to hold this position. As an inspector, Kelly tried to force sweatshops to follow rules to treat employees better. She sued several businesses. Unfortunately, she never won. This inspired her to become a lawyer. In 1985, Kelly graduated with a law degree from Northwestern University. African Americans still possess the constitutional rights provided to them by the 14th and 15th Amendment. The former African American citizens and the later granted African American men the right to vote. However, the Compromise of 1877, violence against African Americans were widespread. The Supreme Court decided in 1883 that the federal case could be a little to help the African Americans exercise their civil rights under the 14th and 15th Amendment. The amendment only prevented state officials from abridging civil rights the court proclaimed in the civil rights case. State law enforced the responsibility for prosecuting private citizens, such as those in the Ku Klux Klan who used force against African Americans. The democracy has steadily regained control of most states and local governments. The likelihood of actual crime changing for harshing African American voters was highly unlikely. The nation underwent a period called Reconstruction from 1865 to 1877. Recently freed African Americans enjoyed public and social equality at an unprecedented level. While Reconstruction ended, the self-proclaimed Democrat Redeemers regained control of the Southern government and issued Jim Crow racial segregation. As a result, many people of color left the South in a process known as the Great Migration. A closed case in May of 1911. On April 1913, 3/4 of the state had ratified the proposed amendment and it was officially included as the 17th Amendment. President Theodore Roosevelt was born as a sickly child with detrimental asthma, but he overcame this health problem by embracing a different lifestyle. He integrated this personality of his vast ranges of interests and would famously achieve into a cowboy persona defined by ruthless masculinity. He was homeschooled and he began a young life naturalism education before attending Harvard College. His book, The Novel of War of 1812, established his reputation as a learned historian and as a popular writer. Upon entering politics, he became the leader of the Reform faction of Republicans in New York State Legislature. His wife and his mother's body died both in a rapid succession, and he escaped to a cattle ranch in the Datooks. He served as Assistant Secretary of the Navy under President William McKinley, but he had resigned from that post to lead the Rough Riders during the Spanish-American War, returning a war hero. He was elected governor of New York in 1898. Vice President Garrett Hoover died, and the New York State Party leadership convinced Kinley to accept Roosevelt as his running mate in the 19,000 election. Roosevelt campaigned vigorously, and the McKinley-Roosevelt ticket won a landslide victory based on a performance of peace, prosperity, and conviction. Garfield Pinchot graduated from Yale in 1889 and studied at the National Forestry School in Nancy, France, and in Switzerland, Germany, and Australia. Upon his return home in 1892, he began the first systematic forestry work in the United States at Batesmore, established of George W. Vanderbilt in North Carolina. In 1896, he was made a member of National Forest Committee of National Academy of Science, which worked out the plan of the U.S. Forest Reservation in the 1897. He became the confident forest agent of the Secretary of the Interior. In 1898, he was appointed Chief of Division, later Bureau of Forestry, and the Forest Service, created in 1905, and the Department of Agriculture, which office he held under President William Kennedy, Theodore Roosevelt, and William Harvard Taft until 1910. During his mission, the entire Forest Service system and administrative machine were built up, and Pinnock's enthusiasm and promotion work did much for the conservational movement in the general. He also served as a member of the Public Land Commission, which he initiated in 1903, and the Inland Waterway Commission. In 1908, he became chairman of the National Conservation Committee. He founded the Yale School of Forestry at New Haven, Connecticut, as well as the Yale Summer School of Forestry at Medford. In 1903, he became professor of forestry at Yale. In 1920, he became appointed state federal forester of Pennsylvania, became a systematic administration of forest area in that state.